everyone, this is Borna Kazerani from Melbourne, Australia. I hope you're doing fine. Today I want to talk to David Simon, who was born in New York, currently based in Los Angeles. David Simon studied at the Rhode Island School of Design, where he received his BFA. He then pursued studies in Italian language and literature at Brown University and continues his studies at the New York Academy of Art. David has exhibited his work at the galleries and museums throughout the United States, including at John Pence Gallery in San Francisco, California, Evoke Contemporary Gallery in Santa Fe, and Long Beach Museum of Art in Long Beach, California, and at the Chapel Art Center in Manchester, NH. In addition to his exhibition career, David has worked in the film industry on such projects as Where the Wild Things Are, Hellboy 2, and Watchmen. David has taught sculpture for more than 20 years in New York, at the Sculpture Center, at the Grand Central Academy in Los Angeles, at the Los Angeles Academy of Figurative Art and Santa Monica College, as well as workshops in the various venues around the United States. He is a founder of the Rome Workshops, a fine arts workshops program in Rome, Italy. And now let me go and talk to David. Hello David, how are you doing?
Good, how are you?
I'm doing really well. It's quite cold here, but yeah, it's all good. So how are you doing? How's the weather in Los Angeles?
It's very hot actually right now.
All right.
Yeah.
It's opposite. All right. Do you want to say hi to those who are watching us now and maybe gonna watch us later on?
Hi everybody.
Okay. So, David, I was reading your biography and it's quite impressive and well done. I love what you're doing. So you studied at the Rhode Island School of Design and then you pursued studies in Italian language and literature at Brown University. I'm trying to understand the connection between these two. Tell me about that a little bit.
Well, I mean, I went to Rhode Island School of Design because I grew up in New York City and I kind of wanted to get out of a big city into a smaller town. And Providence is, very, very small town. But I also wanted to go to a university where I would have a pretty good opportunity to study things other than art. And if you went to Rhode Island School of Design, you could also enroll in Brown University and do liberal arts there. So I took philosophy there. And then my junior year at Rhode Island School of Design, I spent in Italy. And so I began to learn a little bit of Italian. And when I went back to Rhode Island, I decided to study Italian literature, both to get a little bit more of an understanding of the culture and also the language.
Right, so that's okay. So you've done something completely different, just
yeah,
because you've got passion in Italian language, probably. Am I right?
Yes.
Okay, cool. So one of the things actually that caught my attention from the beginning was you've done using people's faces in your sculptures, and most of them are appearing with serious faces and clay colors. It seems that every sculpture wants to convey a message to us. And how does that selection of these people usually happen? I feel like each one of them should have a special character which draws your attention, and then you want to make a sculpture of them.
Yeah, I mean, I think I do two different kinds of work. I do work that is sort of larger scale figurative work, where I have the entire figure, and usually those pieces have a narrative built into the idea of the sculpture. And so the expression and the things that they are holding and the way that that their expression is sculpted all have to do with the idea of the sculpture. And then particularly in the last number of years, I've done a lot of portraits. And the portraits don't necessarily have a narrative idea. They are much more about just sort of exploring both the physiology of the model and the psychology of the model. And I find that in some ways really, really fun, because there's nothing that I have to start out with. I sit down with a model and I get to know them as I work with them. And the more I get to know them, I think the more I come to an idea of what I want their portrait to feel like. And I just keep adjusting until I get the feeling that I want from it.
Okay, you have to know, you have to get to know about the character, the person who you're going to make a sculpture of. And I believe you don't choose people randomly. Am I right? There should be something about them draw your attention.
Yeah, I mean, that's why commissions are really difficult, because you don't really get to choose. If somebody commissions you to do their portrait, you have to do their portrait, whether you find them interesting or not interesting. But generally, if I get to sculpt my friends or my family or just people who I find to have some interesting quality, those are the most enjoyable.
And what's the purpose of using the same color? Like, because I think you're very interested in clay color, like this sculpture behind you. And the majority of them, or the most of them, have got exactly the same color. And I think this is part of your signature.
Yeah, I mean, I think it began, when I was young, and I started out, I would sculpt generally in oil-based clay, although sometimes in water-based clay. And I would work really, really hard to get the kind of the feeling of the flesh that I wanted to communicate in the clay. And then when I started to make molds and cast my work primarily in bronze, initially I wanted to understand sort of traditional bronze casting and patinas, which are the color that you apply to the bronze. And right. Traditionally, bronzes are dark, generally shiny, often brown. And so I did a lot of patinas like that. But it was always very frustrating because the work that went into making them appear soft was undermined by the color and the feeling of the metal. So maybe 15 years ago, I started to explore different ways to get the bronze to feel like the material that I made them out of initially. And so that's why all of those pieces have that patina. The piece behind me is actually still in clay. So that's just the natural color of the material.
Yeah, that's why I was very interested. Like, I was wondering why the majority of your sculptures got the same colors, which I like it, which is very unique. And that's something that I drew my attention at the same time when I was just looking at each piece you've made. So I know you've been running the 4 workshops in Italy, Rome. Why you've been chosen Italy for the place of your workshop? And also I would like to know, what do you do at the workshops? Why set up your workplace there? And what kind of programs are you doing actually in workshops?
Well, I mean, why Rome? It's a pretty easy question to answer, particularly for sculpture. There's not really any other city on earth that has the amount of incredible sculpture and incredible history that Rome does in relation to the history of art and the history of sculpture. In the French Academy in the 18th and 19th century, the highest honor that you could have was being awarded the Rome Prize, which meant that they would send you to Rome for a year to study and work. And so having gone to Rome as a student myself, I knew people in Rome. I really did feel like a very strong connection to it. You know, I grew up in New York, which for the United States is a pretty old city, but not compared to Rome. And then when I moved to California, I felt, you know, especially Los Angeles is a very, very new city, and there's not very much history here. So going to Rome, especially going every year, gives me a real connection to that feeling of history. So that's why I chose Rome. Over the years, I've been doing it for 8 years, and it started with just one sculpture workshop. And over the years, I have lots of friends who are artists, and I began to invite friends to teach workshops. And so every year we run between 8 and 12 different workshops in the Historic Center of Rome. Each workshop is 2 weeks, and we sort of combine visiting great historical sites and talking about different paintings and sculptures and why they were made and how they were made with working in the studio. And you know, one of the things I particularly like about working in Rome that you don't really get almost anywhere else is that so much of the artwork that you see there is in the same location and in some ways serves the same function that it did when it was made. So, for example, if you see a Caravaggio painting in a chapel in a church, he designed the painting for that particular chapel, for the lighting that was in that chapel, for you to see it from that point of view. And so many of the things that most people see in museums have been taken out of their original context and put on a wall. So to be able to sort of study something in the place that it was made for gives you all kinds of interesting insights into why things were made the way that they were.
Okay, and it's easier for you probably in comparison to different parts of Europe because you are quite fluent in Italian language, am I right?
Yeah, I do. I speak Italian.
It's much easier for you. Okay, you have made large and tall sculpture of human bodies. And my question for you is, why are they naked? And what's the story behind them? And what is your obsession with tall and quite tall and big like the one behind you? I want to know about that.
Okay. In terms of the nudity, I think when I began sculpting in the 1980s, there was not really very much education surrounding it. And so if you wanted to learn how to do something like this, your main source of information was going to museums and studying what had been done in the past. And the nude figure was sort of the iconic centerpiece of ancient Greek, ancient Roman, Renaissance, academic French sculpture through the last 2,000 years. And so that was the way, for me, the way into understanding how to manipulate the material and how to make it feel real, which was an obsession of mine when I was starting out. Later on, I began to have the problem of trying to figure out how to make nude sculpture or representational sculpture that didn't feel like it was trying to replicate historical sculpture. And so while keeping the format of the nude figure, I decided to try and eliminate a lot of the elements that you would normally associate with classical sculpture. For example, the classical poses where all the weight is on one hip and the head is turned, and there are all these sort of beautiful angles. And so I made sure that all of the figures that I was doing early on were very, very angular. If it was a figure, he was or she was standing straight up. And if their arms weren't at their side, they were perfectly straight out or straight forward or straight up and down, something that didn't feel classical. And my goal in terms of the formal aspects of the sculpture was to try and combine sort of modernistic compositions with very naturalistic sculpting. As I began to make the work itself, I realized pretty quickly that my own interests were not just making sculptures of naked people for their own sake. I wanted there to be some sort of a meaning, and more than a meaning, a story behind each one. I think I would have really loved to have been a painter, because as a painter, you have the ability to create an entire world. You have an environment that you can create. You can create the lighting, you can create these characters and put them into that situation. But as a sculptor, unless you're going to build in a complete environment, you couldn't really do that. I didn't become a painter because I'm colorblind, and so that an end to my painting career pretty quickly. But as I was sculpting, I realized, number one, that I'm not very good at coming up with an idea and then making a sculpture that represents the idea. I work much better sort of exploring as I'm sculpting what it's beginning to feel like and developing a story based on the feeling that's coming out of the process of sculpting the work. And so a big group of the work was actually based on an opera that I was listening to as I was working. It was an opera called The Black Rider, which was by a musician named Tom Waits and a writer, what was his name? Named William Burroughs. And the story of the opera is pretty straightforward. It's about a man who falls in love with a woman who is the daughter of a hunter on the edge of the Black Forest in Germany. And the father, the hunter, wants the daughter to marry another hunter. And the man makes a deal with the devil for some magic bullets so that he can enter and win a hunt competition and marry the woman he loves. But it doesn't all work out the way he wants it to. And in the end, there are a lot of tragic consequences to his deal with the devil. So I was listening to this opera as I was making these figures, and little by little, some of the imagery, some of the words that I was hearing in the opera began to give me ideas for things to do with the sculpture. So the sculptures, I think, ultimately were inspired by my relationship of listening to that narrative, but are not necessarily representations, each one, of a particular character. Some sculptures are a combination of various characters in the opera. And interestingly, I had been working on this series for, 5, 6, 7 years before I was ever actually got the opportunity to see the opera.
That's
And so,
interesting.
yeah, I was just listening to the songs that were on the soundtrack of the opera. And once I saw it, I realized that I had a very different idea of what it was about, what the songs represented. But I mean, that's fine because the sculptures weren't intended to be a literal narration or illustration of the opera.
That's very interesting. That's very interesting. So it just somehow it happens subconsciously, and then you found that you're interested before you're gonna actually watch the opera.
Yeah, I mean, I think there were a lot of things that I'm interested in, and a lot of them are very good for me personally, but they don't really go very well with the kind of work that I'm making. And every now and then I find something that that I'm interested in, that I'm, a movie I'm watching, or a song I'm listening to, or a piece of artwork, or whatever it is, a book. And the imagery in that artwork somehow goes well with something that I'm working on in the studio. And in those cases, those are super helpful. So I wish it was a little bit more linear, that I could just pick out things from inspirations that would always work. But I think for myself that, I just like to constantly be looking and listening and reading things. And that sometimes those really creep into the work and help.
Okay, great. So, David, now I want to ask you a favor, and I know you're at your studio right now, so I would like to give us a tour. If there any project that you're working right now on it, or if just give us a tour and let's see where you are and what you're doing, please.
Sure.
And also there is an option, you can reverse the camera, and then you can hold the camera and go,
Okay, maybe that would be easier if I do this.
Yes.
Okay. Okay, so here are I've got sort of three.
The internet is not good. I don't know what internet you're using. You're paused. David, you're paused. I can't.
Oh, sorry about that. I think we
That's right.
got disconnected.
Much better now. Okay. Go, please.
Okay. So here are a bunch of different portraits. I can maybe climb up a little higher. And this one on the end is a piece I did of my daughter a number of years ago. This is my brother-in-law right here. Some of these were demonstrations for classes that I teach. Down here, this was a self-portrait I did a number of years ago.
Sorry, I need
Piece,
to interrupt you. What sort of internet are you using? Is that your phone or is it Wi-Fi?
Wi-Fi.
Okay, could you please use your phone?
Is it? Okay, let me do that.
Would be great. Much better.
How's that?
Better now. Yes.
Okay. Okay. So these pieces are bronzes. Both this piece here and this piece here, as well as these pieces in the back. I can come around. These were all part of that series from that opera. In fact, in the hand of this figure, there's a bullet. I was amazed at how easy it was to buy a bullet in New York. And this is a little tiny demonstration piece that I was doing for a class that I'm teaching. And I've got actually lots and lots and lots of those little figures. These are, 12 inches.
Can you stop? I want you to do it a little bit slowly that we will be able to see what you've done.
Okay, well, let me go a little closer and I can show you a couple of individual pieces. Let me turn the light. That should be better.
All right.
There
Yeah, no, if you stop, like if you pause on there, and then I can see what you've done. Wow.
Okay, so, these little pieces are really studies, from fairly quick, something like this. You can sort of see the scale because it's next to a few paintbrushes, so it's a little bit bigger than a paintbrush. This piece is a little bit more developed.
Wow.
But these are kind of exercises to help me relatively quickly
like this one.
Figure out. Yeah, he was a great model. That my goal with these is to very quickly capture the feeling both of the model, and the kind of body and the kind of posture the model has, as well as the pose. Like what's the most important element of the pose in order to convey what the model is doing. And they're great exercises. And so when I teach, I do quite a few.
Wow. What is the one
here?
The one next to it. Before we go on that, there is another sculpture next to it. Is that the face of somebody?
This one here?
Maybe the other. Next to them. Yeah. What's behind that? The guy who is wearing the glasses.
Oh, okay. This is a portrait I did of a friend of mine. Who's a painter. And, let me move this little figure out of the way. So this is a bronze. And number one, I wanted to, let me actually grab a ladder. And then I can be a little bit higher. There we go. So this is bronze. I wanted to sculpt him because he and I are friends and I wanted to spend a little time with him. But he had this massive tattoo. And I thought that it would be really interesting and fun to try and combine that with sort of as classical a treatment of the rest of the portrait as I could. So a very classical kind of cut bottom and turned head. And I kept the expression very, very minimal. And then I did this big tattoo on him. And interestingly, he, the idea was that he was going to do a painting of me. I was going to do a sculpture of him. but it's taken him so long to do the painting that I had to do another sculpture of him because he doesn't look like that anymore. So I've got back here, let me pull up this backdrop. So that's what he looks like now. He grew a big beard. And I just put a t-shirt on him because I didn't want to do the tattoos again because those took so much time.
That's very interesting.
More little figures. Up here, this, for example, this is a portrait of my daughter when she was maybe 3 months old, 4 months old. And so that's the original clay. And over here is a plaster copy of it. Sitting behind a bunch of boxes of screws and other things. And so I did that when she was too young to even hold her head up. So to do the portrait, I sort of held her head in my hand and held a camera in my other hand and took some pictures. But it was super difficult to do that one. And then I did one when she was, I think, 4 years old, which is this one. And she wanted me to do her whole body because I think she didn't like just having the head. So I did her entire figure. And now every time she comes to the studio, she stands next to the sculpture because this was life size. And she likes to see how much she's grown since she was that age.
Wow.
And then actually this is a sculpture that she's working on. She's really into Greek mythology. So she's doing a sculpture of Athena. So
she's been following your path.
She's
following your path.
Oh, she's following a lot of paths. She's a great singer. She's a great writer. She sculpts when I bring her to the studio. She's multi-talented.
Great.
But yeah, it's fun to sculpt with her.
Can you go back to those kind of tall sculpture which are standing next to each other? Not that one, the other side of your studio. They are very, very interesting. And if you step back a little bit, that we can see all of them at the same time. Great. And
they're kind of large. I have to get pretty far away.
And if you put the camera a little bit up, I can.
Here, let me turn the light so you can get better.
Sure.
There we go. That'll be better.
Okay, great. Tell us a little bit about these statues.
Okay, so the first one, the one on the far left with the coffee cup, was actually the first sculpture I made when I moved to California. And I didn't really know anyone. I moved with my wife. She was my girlfriend at the time. And we had a little apartment, or actually coming from New York, it seemed like a very big apartment. And I started this sculpture just in the backyard of our little apartment building. Mm-hmm. And then I got a studio and I kept working, and it was, it didn't really have much of an idea other than trying to, I guess, reflect on myself and my new situation, which was living in in Los Angeles, where I'd never really spent any time before we moved. And I would get up in the morning, I would have, a few cups of coffee, and I would sculpt. And so that's essentially the extent of that piece. The pieces behind it, the other two pieces, were both from that series that was called the Black Rider.
You can go there now. You can go closer now. We've seen that. If you go, yes, please continue.
So the piece right here, without I guess I can take the sheet off of this guy. There we go. That's better.
Yeah.
The piece in the front was one of the first pieces I did in the series. I started out with more of a formal idea. I wanted to try doing something that was, in some ways, the opposite of the traditional sculptural composition. So the most traditional sculptural composition is the pyramid, where you have a big wide base and it gets smaller and smaller until you get to the head. So pieces like Michelangelo's Pietà, where the Virgin Mary is sitting with Jesus on her lap, and it's very, very wide and all fabric at the bottom, and at the very top of the piece is just Mary's head. And there are lots and lots and lots of other examples of that sort of pyramid composition. So my initial idea was just to turn the pyramid upside down and do a big upside down triangle. And so I gave the model I think it was a broom, and told him to stick his arm out, and that created this big triangle. And then as I worked, again, I was listening to that opera, and so the broom handle turned into a shovel, which you can see here. And then in the other hand, I had him holding a bottle. And then I did another piece with the same model, and I took off the hand. I sort of amputated the hand. I changed the hat that he was wearing. And these are 2/3 life size, so bigger than half, not as big as life size. And, I wanted them to have a very sort of particular feel when you're near them, so that they're not so small that they feel like dolls. And they're not so big that they feel monumental, or even if they were life size, they would feel, I think, too much like they should be part of our world. So I wanted them, it was almost my way of trying to create a world that they could live in without having the access to all the things that you would as a painter, like the painting in a background and a lighting situation and a point of view. You can walk around these, so the point of view will always change. But I wanted the scale of them and the feel of them.
Okay. Yeah. Can you please go closer that I can see the details, actually, or we can see the details? They're amazing. They're amazing. Wow.
Thank you.
Wow. Wow, they're amazing. Wow. Wow, well done. They're very impressive.
Thank you.
Wow, that's amazing. Perfect. Wow. They're amazing. Well done.
Oh, thank you. And then this is what I'm working on currently.
All right. What's the story behind this sculpture?
Well, this one I'm still trying to figure out.
Right.
There are a couple, let me pull down this backdrop to make it a little easier to see. Move back far enough. This one actually began as just a portrait. I just had sculpted this model's head, and I felt like there was something about her that felt like a little bit feline, a little bit cat-like. And so I thought, oh, it would be fun to put her together with a cat. My daughter thought that I sculpted too many naked people, so she wanted me to sculpt somebody with clothes on. So I took kind of those three elements, the portrait that I kind of liked, the feeling of her being a little bit cat-like, and trying to do a clothed figure, and put it together. And I would say I'm probably like a little beyond halfway in terms of figuring out where it's going. You know, there'll probably still be a bunch of things on this that will change, but I think I have to figure out ultimately how it all goes together.
Okay, that's amazing. That's amazing. David, I don't want to make you tired. You've been fantastic, and I really appreciate that. I've still got my questions, and people keep sending me questions. And thank you so very much for your tour. And if you go back, we can continue. I can continue asking my question.
Okay, let me
Amazing.
try and get this phone back.
So you've been working in some Hollywood films. Tell me about it. What were you doing? Because I was reading your bio, and did you hear me?
Yeah. You about
Yeah,
film?
because I know actually you've been working some Hollywood movies. So I want to know that actually what you were doing. That you were making the sculptures, or tell me about that.
So when I moved to California from New York, I had no money, and we got into California. We got an apartment, and I had met a guy when I was doing a show in Canada who had done a lot of sculpture for movies. And he told me if I ever moved to Los Angeles, I should call him, and he would help me. So I did that, and I got my first job working on a movie called Where the Wild Things Are, which was based on a very well-known children's book. And it was with a director named Spike Jonze, who was real. You know, I had known him from a movie called Being John Malkovich, which I had always liked. And the thing that I did in that movie was sculpt concept models. So the book is about a little boy who gets into a fight with his mother and runs away and goes to this island full of monsters where he becomes the king of the monsters. And Spike Jonze wanted to do this all with what are called practical effects, which means no computer effects. So you wanted to build these monsters, build them in costumes and have actors inside them. And to do that, you first have to figure out exactly what they're going to look like and how they're going to feel by making a small, you know, maybe a model about this big, maybe a little bit bigger. And you do that in conjunction with the director, going back and forth, and the director will tell you, you know, what he likes and what he doesn't and what he wants it to feel like. And your job as a sculptor is to try and create what he has in his head.
Okay.
And that was, you know, that was a lot of fun. And then I did a big giant head for one of these creatures that had all these kind of motors and mechanisms inside of it, so that when an actor wore it, a puppeteer could control it and make the eyes do different things. And so it was that part was very technical, and I learned a lot on that whole project of different technical things about sculpting. And then from there, I went on to work with a director named Guillermo del Toro, working on Hellboy 2, which was one of this Mexican director's big comic book movies. And I worked with a well-known Hollywood sculptor on this fish character in that movie. And I learned a ton doing that as well. In that case, I wasn't really helping design anything. It was much more technical, the sculpting, making sure that the way it was sculpted and the way it was produced would yield a costume that this actor would be able to wear and move in and be convincing with. And, you know, and then I did a number of other projects after that.
And we have to go back, and I have to go back and watch those film stuff because I'm not new you, so now, so it makes it more even interesting to go and watch it. There are lots of questions. Unfortunately, we can't go through it. 2 of my questions still left, so but I have to wrap it up. So thank you so very much, David, for your time. I love what you're doing. And did you like our conversation?
I did. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. It was lovely. I hope to see you one day in reality. All right. All right. Do you want to say goodbye? And then we'll wrap it up.
Okay, goodbye, everybody. Thank you for watching.
All right. You take care. I'll talk to you shortly.
Okay, take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you so very much for your time. I had a great conversation with David Simon. If you're interested, find out more about David, you can go to his website or on his page on Instagram, and actually going to figure it out who I had a conversation with. Thank you, and I'm sorry that I didn't get a chance to go to your questions. And be well, keep safe, and looking after yourself. Thank you. Bye.